The fading alpha. A hushed dread had descended upon the stone halls of Castle Lyra. The once booming laughter and confident strides of King Lyra, the mighty alpha, had faded into labored, shallow breaths. He lay upon his grand, carved bed, a stark contrast to the vibrant, imposing figure he usually cut. His powerful frame, usually taut with muscle and restless energy, was slack beneath the silken sheets. Even his wolf form, a magnificent creature of midnight fur and eyes like molten gold, seemed to suffer. It lay curled tightly beside him, its coat dull, its usually bright gaze clouded with an animalistic pain that mirrored its master's. The very air in the royal chambers felt thick with despair, a suffocating blanket woven from the whispered prayers of the guards and the frantic clatter of remedies. 100 healers, it was said, had answered the urgent summons. From the sun-baked deserts of the south to the frost-bitten peaks of the north, they came. Each bore ancient scrolls, vials of bubbling concoctions, and pouches filled with exotic herbs. The castle's antechambers overflowed with their strange instruments and potent aromas, sweet, acrid, earthy, and metallic. There was the elderly sage with her glowing poultices, the young alchemist with his intricate distillations, the gruff shaman with his bone rattles and chanting. Each presented their remedies with confident promises, applying balms, brewing teas, or performing complex rituals. Yet, one by one, their shoulders sagged in defeat. King Lyra remained unresponsive, his fever unwavering, his strength ebbing like a receding tide. The healers, their faces etched with professional disappointment, eventually packed their bags, leaving behind only the lingering scent of their failed cures. In the cavernous castle kitchens, the clinking of silver against stone was a rhythmic, almost meditative sound. Ilara, her hands small but deft, polished a tarnished serving platter, her reflection hazy in its dull surface. She listened, as always, to the currents of whispers that snaked their way down from the upper floors. The hushed tones of the guards, the mournful sighs of the noblewomen, the clipped instructions of Mistress Eldrin, all spoke of the same grim prognosis. Another one failed, a kitchen hand murmured, wiping his hands on his apron. They say he hardly moves. Another added, his wolf hasn't eaten in days. A bad sign, that. A pang of profound sadness pierced Ilara's quiet composure. She had only ever seen the king from a distance, a towering presence during feasts, a serious figure during council meetings. He was respected, almost revered, but always a distant star in her humble orbit. Yet, the thought of such a powerful being brought low, of the fear gripping the hearts of those she served, gnawed at her. The castle, usually a bustling, vibrant place, felt muted, its very stones seeming to absorb the collective grief. Mistress Eldrin, her face a mask of weary efficiency, swept through the kitchen, her gaze missing nothing. Less chatter, more work, she snapped, her voice sharper than usual, betraying the strain she too felt. The king's chambers still require fresh linens, regardless of circumstances. Ilara's gaze lingered on the dull gleam of the silver platter. 100 healers, and not one could break through the illness's grip. The sheer impossibility of it settled heavy in her heart. She wasn't privy to the details of the king's ailment, only the outward signs of its devastating effects. But an unbidden thought, a quiet whisper of intuition, began to stir within her, a tiny flicker of defiance against the pervasive despair. It was a thought so absurd, so outlandish for a simple maid, that she quickly pushed it away, focusing instead on the methodical motion of her polishing cloth. The silver began to shine, reflecting her own worried, yet determined, face. Whispers of hope and despair. The creak of the main gate had become a daily dirge. Each morning, another small procession of healers, their faces etched with a profound weariness, would gather their meager belongings. They shook their heads, a silent, damning verdict on the king's fading life, before departing into the grey dawn. With each departure, the castle seemed to draw in on itself, its grand halls growing dimmer, the air thick with the unspoken weight of despair. Mistress Eldrin, usually bustling and sharp, moved with a muted tread, her usual pronouncements reduced to clipped, almost mournful whispers. Even the kitchen staff, usually a boisterous lot, worked in near silence, the clatter of pots and pans replaced by the soft clinking of dishes. Elara watched them go from her usual perch near the scullery window, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. 100 healers had come and gone, their potent concoctions and ancient incantations proving useless against the mysterious malady that gripped their alpha. The king, once a vibrant force of nature, was now barely a breath. The helplessness was a chill that seeped into every corner of the castle, a constant reminder of the encroaching darkness. One evening, as she scrubbed a particularly stubborn pot, a forgotten melody drifted into her mind, soft as a moth's wing. It was a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, a simple tune about a flower that bloomed only under the full moon, its petals glowing with a gentle, healing light. Moon petal, silver and bright, she hummed under her breath, the words a faint echo from a simpler time. Heal the weary, banish the blight. Deep in the forest, where shadows reside, your luminous magic, forever abide. She paused, the pot forgotten. Her grandmother had always spoken of the old ways, of plants and herbs that held more power than any potions brewed by scholars. The lullaby wasn't just a pretty song, it was a story, a legend, about a flower said to possess extraordinary restorative properties. A moon petal. Could such a thing truly exist? A flicker of an idea, fragile as glass, sparked within her. It was a wild thought, born of desperation and the lingering scent of old tales. Later that night, long after the castle had settled into its sorrowful hush, Elara found herself drawn to the king's chambers. She wasn't supposed to be there, it was forbidden for anyone but the healers and the beta to approach. But a strange, compelling urge pulled her forward. As she rounded the corner, a choked sob, raw and guttural, tore through the oppressive silence. Hidden in the deep shadows of an alcove, his broad shoulders shaking, was Ronan. The loyal beta, always stoic, always composed, was weeping. His face was buried in his hands, his usual rigid posture slumped with an unbearable grief. The sight of him, so utterly broken, twisted something in Elara's gut. Ronan, the king's shadow, his fiercest protector, was a pillar of strength for the entire pack. To see him crumble like this, it was a testament to the king's dire state, and it ignited a new, fierce resolve within Elara. The tiny spark of an idea about the moonpetal flower grew into a small, determined flame. It was foolish, perhaps. Dangerous, certainly. Mistress Eldrin would have a fit if she ever knew Elara was even contemplating such a thing. But as she watched Ronan's silent anguish, the fear that had kept her timid melted away, replaced by a quiet, unwavering conviction. If a lullaby held even a sliver of truth, if there was a forgotten flower, a whisper of hope where all else was despair, she would find it. She had to try. For Ronan, for the king, for the desolate heart of the castle. A maid's bold proposition. The scent of fear, thick and metallic, clung to the air of the Alpha's chambers, mingling with the potent, earthy tang of medicinal herbs. Elara, a simple maid, felt her heart hammer against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hands, usually deft with duster and scrubbing brush, trembled as she held a small, intricately carved wooden box. She had spent the last hour pacing the perimeter of the antechamber, the weight of her secret pressing down on her. 100 healers, the kingdom's best, had come and gone, their faces grim, their pronouncements dire. Only she, a mere servant, held a sliver of hope, an unconventional solution she'd learned at her grandmother's knee. Gathering every ounce of her courage, Elara pushed open the heavy oak door leading to the Alpha's private study. Ronan, his face etched with worry lines that seemed to have deepened overnight, was hunched over a large map, his fingers tracing the borders of their territory. His usually impeccable tunic was rumpled, and his dark hair fell across his brow, unkempt. The air around him crackled with a barely contained fury, a silent roar of helplessness that made her stomach clench. He looked up, his eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowing slightly as he registered her presence. Elara? What is it? Have the healers found something? His voice was rough, devoid of its usual calm authority. "No, my lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She took a hesitant step forward. "They have not. But I may have an idea." Ronan's jaw tightened. "An idea? From a maid, when the kingdom's most renowned healers are at a loss?" His tone was sharp, laced with a weary exasperation that pricked at her fragile courage. "With all due respect, Ilara, this is not the time for fanciful notions. Please, my lord, hear me out," she pleaded, her voice gaining a surprising steadiness. She took another step, the scent of his despair now overpowering the fear in her own heart. "My grandmother, she was a wise woman, from the northern mountains. She spoke of a flower, the moon petal. It blooms only under the light of the full moon, high in the crags where the air is thinnest." Ronan pushed away from the map, his gaze piercing. "The moon petal? I've heard tales, of course. Children's stories. They say it can heal anything, even the deepest curses. But no one has seen one in centuries. It's a myth, Ilara." He scoffed, a bitter sound. "We deal with reality here, not fables." "It's not a fable, my lord," she insisted, clutching the wooden box tighter. "My grandmother taught me how to find it, how to prepare it. It's potent, yes, and dangerous if misused, but it is real. And I believe it can help the Alpha." She met his gaze, her blue eyes, usually downcast, now shining with an unwavering conviction. The silence that followed stretched, taut and heavy. Ronan studied her, his expression unreadable. He saw not just a maid, but a flicker of something he hadn't seen in days: hope. Desperation, a relentless beast, gnawed at him. He had tried everything else. What did he have to lose? "Tell me, Ilara," he said, his voice low, a dangerous rumble. "What makes you so certain of this, moonpetal?" She explained, her words a rush of information about the rare plant, its properties, the precise ritual of its preparation. She spoke of the delicate silver sheen of its petals under moonlight, the unique, sweet aroma it emitted, and the specific incantations her grandmother used to harness its power. When she finished, Ronan stared at her, his brow furrowed in thought. The raw vulnerability of his Alpha, fading in his bed, was a constant, searing pain. He was willing to grasp at any straw, no matter how slender. "Very well," he finally said, his voice clipped, the words heavy with the weight of their implications. "You may try. But be warned, Ilara. If this is a trick, if you bring any further harm to the Alpha, the consequences will be severe. Not just for you, but for anyone who vouched for you." His eyes were like chips of ice, holding a promise of swift, unforgiving retribution. "Do you understand the gravity of what you are proposing?" Ilara swallowed hard, the fear returning with a vengeance, but she held her ground. "I understand, my lord. And I will not fail." Journey into the whispering woods. The deep indigo of the sky bled into the distant horizon, a silent promise of dawn still hours away. Ilara moved with the practiced quietude of a shadow, her bare feet making no sound on the cold flagstones of her small antechamber. Her hands, usually adept with a needle and thread, now fumbled slightly with the simple wicker basket she held. Inside, nestled amongst a few dried berries and a water skin, lay a small, tarnished silver locket, a memento from her grandmother, a quiet source of comfort. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the cool night air stinging her nostrils, and fastened the locket around her neck. The weight of it against her skin was a grounding force against the tremor in her heart. She slipped through the servants' entrance, a narrow, seldom used passage that led to the kitchen gardens. The moon, a sliver of polished bone, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with every rustle of the wind. Her eyes, accustomed to the dim light of dawn and dusk, scanned for any movement, any flicker of a torch. The castle's night watch was notoriously diligent, but tonight, fortune seemed to favor her reckless endeavor. A lone guard, his back to her, snored softly near the stable archway, his halberd leaning precariously against the stone wall. Elara held her breath, pressing herself against the damp, ivy-covered wall, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She moved like a whisper, her plain grey dress blending with the muted tones of the sleeping stronghold. Beyond the castle walls, the air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen blossoms. The path, barely more than a deer trail, wound into the whispering woods, a place of old tales and forgotten magic, where even the sun struggled to pierce the ancient canopy. The trees here were not the familiar, orderly oaks of the royal gardens. These were gnarled behemoths, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, forming a dense, forbidding ceiling. Shadows stretched and writhed, transforming familiar shapes into monstrous specters. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, was amplified, taking on a sinister quality that tightened Elara's throat. Her small lantern cast a hesitant circle of light, illuminating patches of moss-covered roots and the occasional glimmer of dew on a spiderweb. The silence, when it fell, was even more unsettling than the sounds, a heavy, watchful presence. Elara clutched her basket tighter, her knuckles white. She remembered the healer's despair, the Alpha King's fading breath, the desperate pleas that had echoed through the castle halls. Her own quiet observation, the flicker of a thought, a memory of her grandmother's old remedies, had led her here, to this dark, foreboding place, in search of a flower whispered about only in ancient lullabies, the moon petal. A branch, heavy with unseen moisture, brushed against her cheek, leaving a cold, clammy sensation. She flinched, her breath catching in her throat, convinced for a moment that something had reached out to her. Her imagination, usually her solace, now became her tormentor. The trees seemed to lean in, their ancient boughs creaking with a language she couldn't understand, yet felt in the deepest part of her being. This wasn't just a forest, it was a living, breathing entity, one that seemed to resent her intrusion. But the Alpha King, his suffering was a constant ache in her mind. He was a good king, stern but just, and even the maids felt his absence, a quiet pall over the castle. Elara pushed deeper, her resolve hardening with each uncertain step. She focused on the soft, earthy scent of the forest floor, on the faint, sweet perfume that was said to precede the moon petal. It was a faint, almost imperceptible fragrance, like lilies steeped in moonlight, and it drew her forward, a tiny thread of hope in the vast, encompassing darkness. Her initial timidity began to recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. She would find it, or she would not return. The moon petal's glow. The forest, a whispering entity she usually found comfort in, now felt predatory. Each rustle in the undergrowth seemed to hold a lurking menace, each shadow stretching long and distorted, a potential ambush. Elara clutched the rough leather satchel to her chest, its weight a small comfort against the rising tide of fear. The path, if it could even be called that, was a winding serpent of tangled roots and moss-slicked stones. She stumbled, catching herself on the rough bark of an ancient oak, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and unseen blossoms. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. What was a simple maid doing out here, alone, in the heart of the cursed Whisperwood? 100 seasoned healers, trained in the most arcane arts, had failed to staunch the poison that ravaged King Lyra's powerful form. What hope did she, with her grandmother's old remedies and a whispered legend, possess? But then, a flicker of his tormented face, his strong hand grasping for breath, burned in her mind. He was dying, and she was his last hope. The thought was a potent antidote to her fear, hardening her resolve. She would not fail him. Pushing through a curtain of thorny brambles, Elara felt a tear in her tunic, a stinging scratch blooming on her arm. She barely registered it. Her eyes scanned the gloom, searching for anything that resembled the faint description her grandmother had given. "Look for the silver glow," she'd said, "where the moonlight kisses the earth most tenderly." But the moonlight here was fractured, dappled by the dense canopy, casting an ethereal, almost deceptive light. Every reflective surface, every dew-kissed leaf, seemed to shimmer, mimicking the very thing she sought. A twig snapped nearby. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She strained her ears, listening to the symphony of the night, the hoot of an owl, the distant cry of some nocturnal creature, the incessant hum of unseen insects. Nothing. It was likely just a foraging animal, but the tension in her shoulders remained. This forest held secrets, and some were best left undisturbed. She pressed on, her movements more deliberate, her senses acutely aware of every shifting shadow, every subtle scent. Hours blurred into an eternity. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, and exhaustion threatened to pull her under. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil around her determination. Had she been foolish to embark on such a perilous quest? Was she merely delaying the inevitable, sacrificing herself for a hopeless cause? Just as despair threatened to consume her, a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence caught her eye. It wasn't the harsh, reflective gleam of wet leaves, nor the transient sparkle of mica in the rocks. This was a soft, internal radiance, a tender bloom of light emanating from the forest floor. Elara squinted, her pulse quickening. She veered off the treacherous path, pushing aside a thick curtain of ivy, her steps now fueled by renewed hope. And there, nestled in a sheltered hollow, bathed in the pale, ethereal glow of the unseen moon, was a patch of flowers unlike any she had ever witnessed. Their petals were a delicate silver, almost translucent, and from their very core, a gentle, otherworldly light pulsed. It was the silver glow her grandmother had spoken of, the beacon of hope in the heart of the whisperwood. Moon petals. They shimmered with a quiet power, a promise of healing. Elara sank to her knees, tears blurring her vision, not of fear, but of profound relief. She had found them. The king had a chance. The gentle touch of hope. The heavy oak door creaked shut behind Elara, the sound echoing in the opulent silence of the royal chambers. She clutched the small, velvet pouch to her chest, the cool, silken fabric a stark contrast to the warmth now blooming in her own. Her gaze swept over the room, finding Ronan still standing guard beside the king's bed, his posture rigid, shoulders squared against the weight of the world. Mistress Eldrin hovered near the foot of the bed, her hands clasped tightly before her, an unusual tremor in her usually unyielding stance. King Lyra lay still, a pale shadow against the rich crimson and gold of his bedclothes. The air, thick with the lingering scent of potent, failed tinctures, seemed to press down on Elara, threatening to steal the fragile courage she had gathered. But then she remembered the whisper of the wind, the feel of the dew-kissed petals, and a quiet resolve settled within her. She moved to the small, ornate table near the window, a sliver of morning light illuminating a silver bowl and a delicate crystal vial of water. Carefully, Elara untied the velvet pouch, revealing the iridescent moon petals nestled within. Their ethereal glow seemed to draw the eye, a soft, pulsating light that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. Mistress Eldrin gasped softly, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and a flicker of hope. "These are, truly them?" Mistress Eldrin's voice was hushed, a rare departure from her usual crisp tone. Elara nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she selected a handful of the petals. They felt strangely alive, cool and supple beneath her touch. She placed them into the silver bowl. "They must be crushed gently," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. She picked up a small, polished obsidian pestle, its surface smooth and cool. With slow, deliberate movements, she began to press and grind the petals. The faint, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine, mingled with something wilder, something of the forest, filled the air. Ronan, who had been watching her every move with a hawk's intensity, stepped closer. "No grand incantations, no arcane rituals?" he asked, his voice rough with an underlying skepticism he couldn't quite mask. Elara offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Sometimes, the simplest things hold the most power," she replied, her voice soft but firm. She poured a few drops of the crystal-clear dew from the vial into the bowl, watching as the crushed petals absorbed the moisture, transforming into a pearlescent, shimmering paste. It was smooth, almost luminous, and smelled faintly of rain and earth. Mistress Eldrin leaned in, her gaze fixed on the paste. "It's beautiful," she whispered, a sentiment so uncharacteristic that both Elara and Ronan exchanged a quick glance. With the paste ready, Elara turned towards the king's bed. Her heart thrummed a little faster, but a deeper calm now guided her hands. She dipped a clean, soft cloth, one of her own, meticulously laundered, into the paste, gathering a small, luminous dollop. All eyes were on her, the silence in the room so profound she could almost hear the whisper of her own breath. She approached the king, her movements as gentle as a sigh. His face was still, his lips dry and cracked. Elara knelt beside the bed, bringing her face close to his, her gaze searching for any sign of recognition, any flicker of life behind his closed eyelids. With infinite care, she dabbed the cool, fragrant paste onto his lower lip. Then, slowly, tenderly, she spread a thin, even layer across both lips. The delicate aroma filled the immediate space around them, a scent of promise and unspoken magic. She lingered there, her hand hovering near his cheek, a silent plea passing from her heart to his. The world seemed to hold its breath. A king's awakening. The air in the royal chamber thickened, not with the usual oppressive weight of illness, but with a new, vibrant energy. The moonpetal paste, a pale shimmer against King Lyra's ashen lips, began to pulse. It was subtle at first, a faint, rhythmic throb of pearlescent light, like a deep breath taken by the paste itself. Each beat of light seemed to draw the very essence of the moon into Lyra's still form. Elara watched, her own breath caught in her throat, a fragile hope blossoming in her chest. Ronan, typically a bulwark of stoicism, leaned forward, his massive frame radiating an unusual tension. Mistress Eldrin, whose customary expression was a tightly controlled mask of disapproval, had allowed her lips to part slightly, revealing a flash of genuine astonishment. The glow intensified, bathing King Lyra's face in an ethereal luminescence, making the fine silver hairs around his muzzle catch the light like spun moonlight. Then, a tremor ran through Lyra's body. It was not the convulsive shiver of fever, but a deep, powerful ripple, as if a dormant volcano had stirred. His eyelids, previously glued shut, fluttered. A collective gasp, barely audible, escaped the three onlookers. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, King Lyra's eyes opened. They were no longer dull and clouded, but a brilliant, intense gold, reflecting the moonpetal's glow with an almost predatory gleam. The luster returned to his fur, not in patches, but sweeping across his body like a wave, from the tips of his ears to the majestic breadth of his chest. His breathing, once shallow and ragged, deepened, each inhale drawing in the very life force of the room. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the very floorboards. It was a sound of immense power, of primal strength reawakened, a sound that had been absent from the castle for weeks. Ronan's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, not out of fear, but a reflex born of years of guarding his alpha. Mistress Eldrin, for once, seemed utterly speechless, her gaze fixed on the reanimating king. The growl subsided, replaced by a deep, steady exhalation. King Lyra turned his head, his golden eyes sweeping across the room, taking in Ronan's rigid posture, Mistress Eldrin's wide-eyed awe. Then, his gaze landed on Elara. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, met hers. There was a flicker of confusion, then recognition, and finally, a profound, almost overwhelming surprise. He saw not the timid maid who usually scurried through the halls, but the quiet strength in her stance, the lingering scent of moonpetal on her hands, the undeniable evidence of her touch. A different kind of growl, softer, yet still potent, vibrated from him. It was a sound of wonder, of immense gratitude. His gaze held hers, a silent question, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Elara felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of quiet triumph mixed with a burgeoning connection she hadn't dared to imagine. The king was awake. And he saw her. He truly saw her. The room hummed with the silent promise of a new dawn. Truth and love unfurl. The oppressive fever broke like a dam giving way, leaving King Lyra drenched but clear-headed. Over the next few days, his strength returned with astonishing speed, a testament to his formidable alpha lineage and perhaps, Ilara's unorthodox remedy. The thick, cloying weakness receded, replaced by a robust energy that pulsed through his veins. He ate with a wolf's appetite, his deep voice regaining its resonant power, and the haunted look in his eyes slowly gave way to a keen, intelligent gaze. Ilara remained a constant presence by his bedside, a quiet shadow moving with surprising efficiency. She brewed strengthening teas, changed his linens with practiced ease, and ensured he rested without interruption. It was during these quiet hours, when the castle hummed with its usual activities but the infirmary remained a sanctuary, that Lyra truly began to see her. "Tell me, Ilara," he rumbled one afternoon, his voice still a little rough, "how did you come to know of such a remedy?" Ilara, startled, nearly dropped the cup of broth she was offering. Her cheeks flushed, a delicate rose against her pale skin. "It was a story, Your Majesty. My grandmother, she always spoke of old ways, of the forest's whispers." Her gaze, usually downcast, flickered to meet his for a moment, revealing an unexpected spark of defiance. "I simply remembered." Lyra observed her, a curious warmth unfurling in his chest. She was not like the court ladies, with their painted smiles and artful flattery. Ilara's honesty was refreshing, a cool spring in a parched land. "And you weren't afraid? To challenge 100 healers?" A faint smile touched her lips, a hesitant blossom. "Fear has a different taste when someone you care for is in danger, Your Majesty. The fear for you was stronger than the fear of their disapproval." Her words, simple and unadorned, struck him with the force of a physical blow. Care for him? A king, who barely knew her name before this? He found himself drawn into conversation, asking about her life in the village, her dreams, her thoughts on the world beyond the castle walls. She spoke of the changing seasons, the resilience of the wild herbs, the kindness of strangers. Her perspective was untainted by the court's politics, her understanding of strength rooted not in conquest, but in quiet endurance and compassion. He realized, with a jolt, that he enjoyed her company immensely. Her gentle spirit was a balm to his often troubled mind, her quiet courage a revelation. Ronan, ever the vigilant guard, watched these interactions with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. He'd often find Lyra listening intently, a rare, almost soft expression on his face, as Ilara described the intricate patterns of a spider's web or the melody of a distant bird. "She speaks like a sage, Your Majesty," Ronan remarked once, a hint of awe in his tone. "Not a maid." Lyra merely nodded, his gaze fixed on Ilara as she meticulously arranged a vase of wildflowers. He saw the slight tremble in her hands as she worked, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw a depth of character he had never imagined possible in someone so unassuming. Her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in goodness, had saved his life. And in doing so, she had peeled back layers of his own carefully constructed pride, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't known he possessed. He found himself looking forward to her presence, his days structured around their conversations. The scent of lavender and the soft rustle of her movements became as familiar and comforting as his own heartbeat. He had always valued power and overt courage, the roar of the alpha. But Ilara had shown him a different kind of strength, one that bloomed in the face of despair, nurtured by empathy and an unshakable belief in life. One evening, as twilight painted the room in hues of amethyst and rose, Lyra reached out, his large hand gently covering hers as she adjusted his blanket. Her fingers, small and delicate, flinched under his touch, but did not withdraw. He looked into her eyes, no longer seeing just a maid, but a woman of profound grace, whose heart held more truth and love than any he had ever encountered. A startling realization blossomed within him, as vibrant and unexpected as the wildflowers she brought into his room. This quiet maid, with her honest eyes and gentle spirit, had not only saved his life, but had also captured his heart. The Queen's coronation. The great hall, usually a bastion of solemn quietude, vibrated with an unfamiliar hum. Courtiers, bedecked in their finest silks and velvets, whispered behind gloved hands. King Lyra, his regal bearing fully restored, strode to the dais, his presence commanding immediate silence. His eyes, once clouded with illness, now shone with a clarity that seemed to pierce through the gilded air. He stood before his throne, not on it, a subtle defiance of expectation. "My loyal subjects," King Lyra's voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the vast chamber. "For weeks, this kingdom watched as I battled an affliction that threatened my very life. Many tried to mend me, yet it was one unexpected soul who succeeded." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the faces, lingering on a small figure standing near the back, almost lost amidst the grandeur. "It is with immense joy and profound gratitude that I announce my decision. Ilara, the quiet maid who, through her courage and unwavering spirit, brought me back from the brink, shall be my queen." A collective gasp rippled through the hall, followed by a stunned silence, then a confused murmur. Mistress Eldrin, standing stiffly by the entrance, looked as though she might faint, her usually impeccable coiffure seeming to wilt. Ronan, however, standing sentinel beside the king, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a flicker of approval in his usually impassive eyes. Ilara felt the weight of every gaze, 1,000 eyes dissecting her simple gown, her flushed cheeks. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of disbelief and burgeoning hope. She had expected gratitude, perhaps a position of honor, but queen? It was a dream woven from moonbeams, impossibly bright. King Lyra extended his hand, a silent invitation. She hesitated for a breath, then, drawing upon a wellspring of newfound strength, she moved, her step surprisingly steady, towards him. As she reached the dais, King Lyra's hand closed over hers, his touch warm and reassuring. He turned to face the stunned court, his grip firm. "Her compassion, her resolve, and her quiet strength are qualities I have come to admire above all else. She has shown me a different kind of power, a power this kingdom needs." Then, the dam broke. A ripple of applause began, tentative at first, then swelling into a thunderous roar. The initial shock gave way to an infectious current of excitement. A maid, a commoner, elevated to such a position. It was a story that would be told for generations. The air crackled with a potent mix of astonishment and burgeoning joy. Mistress Eldrin, recovering her composure, albeit with a faint tremor in her hand, began to issue orders for the immediate preparations. The castle, usually a place of strict routine, transformed into a hive of joyful chaos. Servants scurried, their faces alight with smiles, as banners were unfurled, feasts planned, and gowns prepared. The unexpected union, born not of political alliance but of life-saving devotion, resonated deeply within the castle walls. It was a testament to a different kind of love, one that defied tradition and embraced the extraordinary. Ilara stood beside King Lyra, his hand still gently clasping hers. The sound of cheers and the vibrant buzz of celebration filled the hall, no longer intimidating, but exhilarating. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. His gaze met hers, a depth of tenderness in his usually stern features that made her heart ache in the most wonderful way. She, the girl who once dreamed only of quiet days, now stood poised to rule beside a king, her future intertwined with his, a tapestry woven with threads of love, hope, and a courage she never knew she possessed. The weight of the crown felt less daunting with his hand in hers, and the future, once an unwritten page, now promised a grand, unfolding narrative.